So once again, I want to welcome everyone to the ESN webinar, transition webinar for the TPA. This webinar will go over information related to the impending teaching performance assessment for ESN credentials. And this is going to be one of other webinars that we will be having as we make our way to the July 1st implementation start date. I want to welcome you and also allow for some introductions. So I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Heather Kennedy, who is a consultant in our department. Heather.
Hi, I'm Heather Kennedy. I'm also a consultant in performance assessment development. I am working primarily on the new literacy performance assessment, but my background is in being an education specialist. So I also work with James in this area as well. And nice to be with you all today.
Thank you, Heather. And if you have not already met me, I am James Webb. I have been the consultant overseeing the implementation of the commissions model, Ed Specialist Cal TPA. I've also worked with the Cal TPA for general education, as well as the Cal APA. So I'm very excited to present this information to you because this has been an ongoing development that we've seen over the past 2.5 years. And it's just exciting that it's all coming together now as we approach the summer. We do have an agenda for today, just to go over some of the important elements. I'm going to just give a very brief history and background of where we have been and where we are now with regard to the development of the teaching performance assessment. I'm going to emphasize some important elements with Program Standard 5, the assessment of candidate competency in the education specialist program standards. I will provide an overview of the Cal TPA for extensive support needs. I did this a couple of weeks ago for the MMSN, mild to moderate support needs. And again, this is the commission's model just to give you an idea about what it may look like. And then finally, questions, and we'll provide a closure. We do have 2 hours. And so we did want to allow that time in case folks had questions that they wanted to possibly ask. Just to set our norms for this morning, please have your microphone muted unless you would like to ask a question. We will unmute your microphone, or you'll be able to do that so that you can ask your question. Please use the chat feature to pose questions as we are moving through the webinar. Heather is graciously going to monitor the questions in the chat. However, we do ask that you have the chat, use the chat for your questions and avoid sending a direct message to Heather, only because we want to make sure that everyone is able to see the questions. And there may be a question that someone has or a thought, and we want to make sure the entire room gets that understanding. We do ask that you keep the questions to a general focus rather than program or candidate specific. If you do have those types of inquiries, I will provide emails at the end of this webinar that you'll be able to send information to get your questions answered. I do ask that you avoid multitasking as much as possible, just so that we can make sure that you hear all the information presented, and then moderating your participation to honor the time of our presenters and our participants. So with that, let's go ahead and get into some of the information that led us to this place where we are implementing a teaching performance assessment. If you attended the mild to moderate support needs webinar that was held on March 28th, you'll see that some of this information is going to be a repeat of that. So please bear with me until we get to the specific ESN areas. So just as a reminder, in 2015, the state, in coordination with the California Department of Education and the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing, created a task group report that was published in 2015. and made some key recommendations that the commission took forward in its redevelopment of the education specialist credential system. The first one is that SPED teachers learn both the general education and special education TPEs, or what we call the common trunk of universal TPEs, so that it is understood that all students are general education students and that special education services are meant to be a network of support for students to access the general education curriculum. There were some recommendations made that teacher preparation and learning systems should employ. Many of these have found their way into the TPA, in particular, Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. Social emotional learning has also been implemented. The use of data to monitor student progress and inform instruction, evidence-based reading instruction, and we will be going into that more as Heather continues the work with literacy and reading under SB 488, and also digital literacy and instructional technology to ensure that all students have access to educational technology to augment and enhance their understanding of core curriculum. SPED teacher candidates should learn how to support the needs of all students, and there should also be considerations for authorizations for DHH, VI, and as we already have with early childhood special education. SPED teachers should be able to provide instruction and support to general education students. So this would be an example of a co-teaching model in which a special education teacher and a gen ed teacher would work together to co-facilitate and co-teach various courses throughout a student's educational career. Heather, for example, co-taught in high school, I believe it was biology. So Heather worked with students and was paired with a general education biology teacher in order to provide support and instruction for all students in the class. It was not a separate students on one side, and another set of students on the other side, but all students working together along with instructional assistants. SPED teacher candidates should be provided by their programs with in-depth knowledge of how to support students who struggle with learning, who have behavioral disorders, physical disabilities, and other healthcare needs. So this was very important for the design team to ensure that as the Education Specialist Cal TPA was being put together, that there would be several opportunities where candidates would be able to demonstrate their knowledge and ability in these areas. And that SPED teacher candidates should be trained in assistive technologies, augmentative and alternative communication systems, and those critical transitions for students as they move beyond high school and into adulthood and beyond. As I said before, we know that the new credential system that has been instituted by the Commission on Teacher Credentialing has a common trunk of general education. And from there, the special education credentials branch off from that. But the understanding is that all students have access to all content standards and other supports necessary in order to see their success. So the big change that occurred in special education when the groups were met to convene after this task force report in the fall of 2016 was to take 7 credentials and move them down to 5. And in those 5 credentials of mild to moderate, extensive support, early childhood special education, DHH, and VI, it was looking at how the needs of the students could be met through that system of supports to ensure that all students have access. As you can see on the timeline, the work groups first met to revise the credential structure, as well as revise the TPEs and the program standards. And then the TPA folks started meeting in February of 2020 to complete the opportunities to create assessment cycles, develop scoring rubrics, and be able to participate in pilot and field tests in order for them to be able to see how what is being asked of candidates is both reliable and valid to what the TPEs are measuring. Currently, we are about to conclude our field test. Actually, I take that back. We did conclude our field test for mild, moderate, and extensive support needs last Monday. We just have a couple of other submissions coming in. And then as you can see in May 23rd through the 27th, we will be convening a standard setting study panel for both mild to moderate and extensive support needs. 2 days will be devoted to mild moderate, 2 days will be devoted to extensive support. And during those 4 days, that standard setting panel will make a recommendation for the purposes of a minimum passing standard for the education specialist Cal TPA. In June, I will be presenting an item on the 16th to the commission in which I will present the passing standard, also an update for the work that has been done on the education specialist Cal TPA, and submitting for formal approval to the commission the education specialist Cal TPA for both mild to moderate support needs and extensive support needs. And then as we've been stating and you've heard, July 1st of 2022 is when we have set the date that candidates who are enrolled on or after that date will be responsible for passing the TPA. We have had questions about if a candidate is pursuing, let's say, a multiple subject and an ed specialist credential at the same time, what TPA do they take? If you remember, in April, I presented an item in which the commission agreed that one teaching performance assessment would be required for a candidate. It would be based on the needs of the candidate and the program in collaboration with one another. We put forward that in regulations at the last commission meeting this past April. It was in the consent calendar, and so now it's been taken up to the OAL Office of Administrative Law, where it has a 45-day public hearing, and upon that closing and no other recommendations from the Office of Administrative Law, it will become regulation as soon as it's passed. So please understand that if you have candidates who are working on multiple credentials, they will only be responsible for one TPA. So with that, after going through some history and logistics, wanted to see if there are any questions that you may have with regard to where we have come or where we are going with this new structure. So I will pause here. Heather, let me know if anything comes up in the chat.
Nothing so far. Oh wait, spoke too soon. Our program offers mild, moderate, and extensive support needs credential. Which TPA would be required?
That's a great question. And actually that would be, and the way that we have written it into the regulations is that should be a conversation that you would have with the candidate. The program and the candidate would need to select the appropriate TPA based on the clinical experience that the candidate is having. Also what the future career goals possibly are of the candidate. And so that would really need to be a conversation that you would have. But again, with the commission's decision that only one TPA is required, it is ultimately left up to the candidate and program input to help them make that decision.
Thank you. And another question, will the commission be looking to approve the ED TPA prior to the July 1st date?
That's a great question. The ED TPA has put forward their model for special education, It is currently under review. I don't know the exact date, unfortunately, because I am primarily working with the Ed Specialist Cal TPA, but I do know that it has been submitted for approval. Again, remember that if a TPA is approved by the commission, it can be offered. Currently for Gen Ed, we have the Cal TPA, which is the commission's model. We have the Ed TPA, and we also have the model sponsored by Fresno State, which is FAST.
And I believe that answers the next question, which is, do we have a choice between Cal TPA and Ed TPA?
Absolutely. When a TPA is approved, you will have the institution will make a decision as to which performance assessment it wishes to use. Again, the requirement is it has to be approved by the commission. And once it is, then you are able to use that model.
And that is it for the chat right now.
Okay. I will continue. And again, Heather, as those questions come in, please let me know. So what I want to talk about now is Standard 5. And Standard 5, again, is the assessment of candidate competency in the education specialist program standards. This piece of the standards, you did not have to write to the majority of them in your transition plans that were due on October 31st of 2021. However, as we are moving into implementation, I know that folks, I believe in the Indigo cohort had to write to the shaded areas of Program Standard 5. And so as you, depending on where you are in your color cohort, you will be responding to this in your program review. But just as a reminder of what candidate competency is looking like, the language from the standard reads, candidates are guided and coached on their performance in relation to the TPEs using formative evaluation processes. This verification of candidate performance on the TPEs is provided through candidate passing of the teaching performance assessment models selected by the preparation program. So again, based on the question that I received just a few moments ago, that is your choice to choose which assessment model you would like to have by your preparation program. So within these shaded areas, there are specific points that I just want to emphasize with you as it relates to the way that your program will prepare to implement a performance assessment. In the program standard 5A1, you will need to designate a program coordinator that you will communicate with evaluation systems, and this will be with either the Ed TPA or the Ed Specialist Cal TPA. That will be the point of contact. If you have a program coordinator for mild to moderate, it can also be the same for ESN. It does not have to be a different person. Understanding that this program coordinator will be the person who receives the data for candidate scores every month, and they will be attending yearly and quarterly program coordinator meetings. In addition, as we are unveiling and rolling out the Ed Specialist Cal TPA, there will be initial meetings for program coordinators to help orientate them to the Ed Specialist Cal TPA model. I am sure the Ed TPA will hold similar webinars for its participants as well. But you will need to designate a program coordinator that will be that point person to receive information for your performance assessment. In standard 5A2 for the video, it is going to be very important that institutions have a person who has the technical expertise to assist candidates with the way that they can video record themselves when they are providing that for the performance assessment. In the assessment design standards, it is very specific that candidates must video record themselves interacting with students. And so it is important that you put some systems into place to help candidates when they are working on this particular aspect of their performance assessment submission. Also in 5A2, you're going to want to take a look at your MOUs that you have with your districts, partnering districts and schools. You already should have permissions in place for videos. And remember that candidates do not collect any type of permission slips from the school districts with regard to video recording students. It is a document that the candidate will complete an attestation that they have secured permission to video record students. If you need a sample MOU, there are some on a website that I will give to you a little bit later that is sponsored by Evaluation Systems. And remember that candidates should have access to a range of students. We're going to look at the assessment design standards in just a few moments, but remember that students must have access to students who are identified as language learners, students obviously who are on an IEP, who have a range of receiving different services, and also underserved students who candidates can show interaction with. Continuing on with these implementation of the different program standards under 5. 5A4 addresses how the program will review aggregating data over time. Remember that ADS that you participate in annually will be posting data on TPA passage rates. This data has already started to occur for general education TPAs. Cal APA is next, and then Ed Specialist Cal TPA, or the Ed Specialist TPA will be following that. So remember that you must look at your data over time to see what areas of items are going well and what areas of growth you may want to identify as you are setting your goals for your program. 5A5 applies to faculty training. The program coordinator trains the faculty in the ways that they will support candidates with the TPA. Remember that your faculty supervisors and master teachers must complete 10 hours of training. You can certainly use this requirement in this area because the idea of the teaching performance assessment as a summative assessment or end of course or end of program assessment should not be the approach that your program takes. It needs to be a collective and progressive assessment that the candidate completes with the support of your faculty, of your mentor teachers, and others to help that candidate harvest which pieces of evidence they will provide for their electronic portfolio. 5A7 also addresses the appeal process that you need to have available on your website, and it should also be in your catalog, as well as your remediation policies and how candidates can access these materials. In the program standards for Program Standard 5, it is very important that you and your program decide what type of remediation will be available to candidates who do not pass one or more parts of the performance assessment, and you will have to also delineate that in the program standards. This is a website that I would recommend that you may want to take a look at. ctcexams.nesinc.com has a number of acceptable supports that you can provide to your candidates, such as opportunities for them to peer edit each other's work, what role faculty support plays in providing information to candidates. It is in the form of coaching rather than direct instructions, such as evaluating a candidate submission. The other piece here is you want to think about as you are looking at this, how the TPA cycles will fit into your coursework and program, remember that it should not be an end of course or summative assessment, but should be built along the way. All of the tasks that candidates are participating in with the performance assessment are things that they should be doing in their clinical experience, such as planning instruction, getting to know students, delivering instruction, reflecting on their instruction, applying what they've learned to future situations. These are all behaviors that beginning teachers and veteran teachers should always be engaged in throughout their career. 5B2 addresses the issue of retakes. You'll want to determine in your program how many retakes will you offer before you start to counsel a candidate possibly out, or how often will you allow the retakes? Will there be a period of time that you need to, or that you'll want to implement? Again, this is based upon the program. However, it is a consideration that you're going to want to have delineated so that it is apparent to the candidate as well as to the commission on how you're providing support. And also 5C addresses the training provided for assessors. We have opportunities for assessors to join us in the work that we are doing. In fact, this week we are starting the scoring for cycle 2 of the mild to moderate support needs tomorrow and Wednesday. And then Thursday and Friday, we'll be continuing on with extensive support needs. What I'm going to do, I see a number of items have come into the chat. Heather, I'm going to take a pause before I go to the assessment design standards and let you read those questions.
Yes. So if a candidate does not want to use the TPA model adopted by their program, can they use the alternate CTC approved TPA regardless of what their program chooses?
In order for them to receive the results and for it to be a clean recommendation of the preliminary credential, the candidate must use the TPA that the program has adopted.
Okay.
We know that the TPA requirement due to the executive order and then SB 820 was pushed into induction, which gave a little bit more flexibility, but as we know, those flexibilities are coming to an end. And so it really needs to be the program, excuse me, the performance assessment that the program has selected.
Great. And then for our currently enrolled undergrad students who have 3 or more years left in their program, do they have to do the TPA or can they stick with the current non-TPA system?
They can stick with the non-TPA system. Yes, if they've already started, remember that July 1st, 2022 is our start date. But if they have already started the program and they wish to pursue the earlier version of the mild to moderate credential or moderate severe credential, they may do that. However, if they want the new credential, they will have to complete the TPA.
Okay. And then if our program starts in June, do the candidates need to take the TPA in order to get the new extensive support needs credential, even though the TPA start date is July 1st?
The answer is yes. Okay. If they want the new extensive support needs credential, then yes, they will have to take and pass the TPA.
And that is it for questions right now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Heather. I appreciate your help with this. So let's go to the assessment design standards. One of the questions that I often get is, do we have to do, why do we have to do that? Where does it say? Well, here it is in the assessment design standards. These were adopted by the commission. They have been revised as we have continued our work in expanding performance assessments to admin services credentials, as well as education specialist credentials. They probably will expand even more as we get into literacy. So one of the pieces that I want to identify is, where it is that candidates must engage in certain tasks that are required by these standards. So the first one states that all candidates must be engaged in complex pedagogical assessment tasks to prompt aspects of performance that measures the TPEs. When you go and look at the TPEs as you did to determine and create your course matrices, you'll see that there are several pieces of language that exist in the performance expectations that candidates must demonstrate. When the design team sat down to put together the mild to moderate and extensive support needs cycles, the TPEs were their guide. They looked at them and they determined where it would be appropriate for these various performance expectations to be in the different cycles of the performance assessment. The focus on addressing the teaching of students who are English learners is also in the assessment design standards. All candidates, remember, when they receive a preliminary education specialist credential, have an authorization that states that they are legally able to work with students who are English learners. Therefore, the performance assessment must show that they have this knowledge. I realize that there are times when candidates may not have access to students who are English learners, but they will still provide information on how they can work with the English language development standards and work with students who need support in accessing academic language and or other language related goals. Really, it's about creating a language rich environment for all students to thrive and to learn. The other piece that's very important in the assessment design standards is how candidates will work with students who need to be served differently, who have certain disabilities that are identified in the IEP, and what support services are provided to these students based on the needs and the requirements of their IEP. And also, this is important information to show how they will effectively teach these students and give them access to the core curriculum. As I said previously, the assessment design standards require candidates to video record their teaching performance with annotations describing the lesson plan and the instructional adaptations and other teaching decisions that they showed with regard to how they can provide evidence that they are meeting the needs of all students. The annotations are key to the assessment of the video that makes it authentic and makes it very specific. Oftentimes what candidates will do is they'll tell us what they're doing, but it's more about the how and the why of their decisions that were made. Also in our assessment design standards is that the performance assessment is designed to yield enough evidence that is valid to provide an overall judgment of each candidate's qualifications for the preliminary teaching credential as one part of the requirements for the credential. As a reminder, 3 important elements go into the recommendation of the preliminary. The first one is coursework, so the coursework that is completed by a candidate in your program. The second is the clinical experience that the candidate has and the hours that they serve in working with students. And the third is the performance assessment. Each one cannot be on its own. They all must work together, which is why the performance assessment and all the other aspects of the program will work best when they are working together in a collective, unified approach to supporting candidates. Remember that the assessment design standards do call for that clear and easy to implement appeal procedure for those students who did not take or did not pass the assessment. And then, as I said previously, what will be your retake policies for candidates who fail one or more parts of the TPA? How will you provide them with support, remediation? What will be the timeline? How many retakes? These are all questions that you need to have at your program. Remember, the commission is not going to tell you it needs to be this number. This will be a determination that you will make, but it must be defensible and it must be clear to all candidates as they are enrolling in your program. So with that, I'm going to take another pause and see if any questions have come up. So Heather, if you wanted to take a look at the chat, maybe give it a moment or two and see if we have any questions.
Could you talk some more about the appeal process?
Absolutely. So in terms of the appeal procedure, there is a set procedure that is established by evaluation systems. And remember that Evaluation Systems Group of Pearson is the technical contractor for the Ed Specialist Cal TPA and also the technical contractor for the Ed TPA. There is a specific appeal procedure that is provided by their website, along with ways that the candidates can access information if they wish to appeal and what steps they need to take for that process. So that information, depending on which model you are going to use, will need to be available to candidates in case they need to access it. Other questions, Heather?
That is it at this time.
Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go into very brief detail, much like I did with the mild to moderate support needs credential specific TPA, is focused on what the commission's model has in its ESN performance assessment. It's just a brief overview. These are just components of the commission's TPA model. Of course, it is not the Ed TPA, but I just wanted to give you an idea about what it looks like in terms of the commission's model. There are 2 instructional cycles for the ESN TPA. Both follow the overarching cycle of plan, teach and assess, reflect and apply. The first instructional cycle is learning about students with IEPs and planning instruction. And the second instructional cycle is assessment-driven instruction for students with IEPs. What's different from the MMSN to the ESN version is that in the ESN version, candidates may work with a small group of students, a whole class, or one individual student. Remember that in MMSN, they work with a small group of students or a whole class. But in ESN, the design team members were very aware that in some situations, a candidate may only work with one student based on their caseload. When they follow this overarching inquiry plan, in the planning phase, they research about their students or student based on their caseload. They plan a lesson or series of lessons. They then teach and assess during step 2 and annotate their videos as they are capturing them. They then reflect on their practice and then apply their learning to new situations. Some key design features for the ESN version of the Cal TPA. Again, the focus is on teaching all students, including those students with an IEP who are English learners, students with an academic, physical, and/or behavioral needs, in addition to receiving other services such as occupational therapy, medical related or medically fragile needs that need to be addressed, speech and language, and also students who are often marginalized or underserved, who may have something that is apparent to the candidate that may not necessarily reflect the disability of the student. It is asset-based with not a deficit mindset employed, where there is content-specific pedagogy in literacy and mathematics, and the ability for other contents to be related to literacy or mathematics. It is meant to be diagnostic and formative to candidates and programs. So if a candidate takes cycle 1, they're able to receive information that then helps them as they are approaching cycle 2. It is centrally scored by education specialist credential assessors. So all of the assessors whom we will train this week do have the requisite ed specialist credential for that particular area. Remember that the video of teaching is directed, specific, and annotated. And finally, as I've said before, it is a natural harvest of evidence. What candidates are already doing in their clinical placements and how that information can be put together in an electronic portfolio for the performance assessment. Some other important design features, and remember back to the special education task force report, you're probably noticing some of these things coming up, especially with educational technology, which is embedded in the instructional planning and practice. That integrated instructional approach is supported within literacy and mathematics. With the ESN credentials, integrated instruction is also content specific with functional and/or life skills. In many of the field test submissions that we have reviewed, a number of them have been in adult transition learning centers. And oftentimes it's about working with students who are 21, 22, as they are moving into adulthood and what important functional and life skills they need in order to be successful. A big piece for that is in the TPEs, and that was also a focus of the design team, was the coordinating and/or collaborating with instructional support personnel in planning lessons. And instructional support personnel does not have to be limited to paraeducators. It could be general education teachers, school psychologists, counselors, even administrators, any adult that provides support to students in the classroom. There's a focus on academic language and/or communication development. And in the ESN area, there is consideration for students who are nonverbal and information that has been provided about the ways that candidates can work with students who are nonverbal in a way that they would be able to communicate and also showcase different information. I'll give you an example. In a recent submission that Heather and I looked at, there was a kindergarten student who was nonverbal. He used his AAC device to communicate. And so we were able to see how the candidate meets the needs of that student using that particular device and still accomplish the ability for content-rich instruction. There's a focus on age and/or developmentally appropriate higher order thinking. Remember that the Special Education Task Force report called for these important elements through a complex implementation of UDL that would provide students with the ability to demonstrate higher order thinking. And with ESN and MMSN, there's an attention to both classroom and non-classroom instructional contexts. As I stated before, what is measured are the TPEs, both the universal and ESN. Remember that MMSN candidates and ESN candidates are held to both the universal and their credential-specific TPEs. And so, as you know, the 6 domains are listed here. And then, of course, these 6 domains then become the standards for the CSTPs, or the California Standards for the Teaching Profession. The underlying theory of action is listed here. Again, you'll see items that were taken from the task force report, such as universal design for learning, asset-based instructional design, the role of English language development, the higher order thinking skills, facilitation of instructional support personnel, the importance of modeling and metacognition, and also scaffolding to assist students in reaching the content that is in the core curriculum. These were our field test programs over the course of either cycle 1 or cycle 2 that participated in the field test. These are also going to be the participants from both the candidates and the program coordinators and assessors that we will have information, and where we've been able to gather data that we will present to the design team actually a week from tomorrow when we have our next design team meeting. Some additional supports that we provide at the commission. There is a pilot site that you can certainly look at for the Ed Specialist Cal TPA, or the commission's model, which is listed here. We invite you to take a look at that and see what materials are out there and items that you might be able to view to assist your program in transitioning to this performance assessment. If you have questions in terms of policy, spedcaltpa@ctc.ca.gov would be an email address that you would want to send information so that you could get answers that are regarding the policies with in place for the TPA. We do have office hours every Friday at 10 a.m. What's been interesting is now that the MMSN and ESN submissions have been uploaded, we're now starting to get some really good questions about implementation, which we're happy to take. And you can find the Zoom link for these office hours on the PSD e-news. All of our performance assessments sponsored by the commission have implemented a Digging Deeper webinar series. Our next one is Wednesday, May 20th from 1 to 3 o'clock. And it is going to be about social emotional learning, provided with information from our folks who are implementing the Cal TPA and the Cal APA about how to create social emotional learning supports for students in classrooms, and how candidates can utilize that information to show how they are meeting those aspects of the TPEs in which this is required. We are also online with YouTube. If you haven't had a chance to subscribe to the commission's YouTube channel, highly recommend that you do so. You can go in there and subscribe, and then you will get updates every time videos are uploaded to the commission's website. As you know, the commission meeting was last Thursday and Friday, so our IT department is busily putting together those YouTube videos to make them accessible for our folks to either review items that were presented or perhaps watch it for the first time. And you would get a subscription notification if you had signed up. There is a Cal TPA playlist listed here, as well as one specific for the Ed Specialist Cal TPA playlist. And this is where the information from today's webinar will be posted by this afternoon. Before I turn it over to some more questions, our Education Specialist Cal TPA Program Coordinators email list is something that I have created that can assist you in getting information. It works similarly to the PSD e-news. I send it out every other month. I sent one out, I believe, on April the 1st. I believe, Heather, do you have the ability to put that in the chat? Thank you so much. Heather's going to put.
I will do that now.
Perfect. Heather's going to put a URL into the chat if you would like to sign up for this. Even if your institution or program goes with the Ed TPA, there's still information that I provide that could help you with either model that you select by giving you important information from the commission, other ideas, opportunities to serve as an assessor, and other information that might be important to you. Remember that if you have TPA questions, you can send those to spedcaltpa@ctc.ca.gov. And program questions, if these are questions with regard to the implementation of your program standards or other aspects, my colleagues, William, Patrick, and Sarah Solari monitor the special education at ctc.ca.gov mailbox. And so this might be an area that you could go to if you have questions with regard to that. And so with that, I am going to take us back into gallery mode because that is the end of my formal presentation. And I want to see if there are possibly any questions that may have come up through this that I could answer for you.
So some questions from the chat. If we have candidates who are currently enrolled and do not choose to pursue the credential, but have all the current program requirements for the credential, if they want to come back after July 1st to get the credential, would they have to do the TPA even though they were originally enrolled prior to the changes?
That question can be answered by the bridge authorization, and there is a item. There was a TPA, or excuse me, a special education item. I believe it was last year. I want to say April or June of 2021. If you want to send me an email at jweb, can you put this in the chat, Heather? jweb@ctc.ca.gov. I will send you information that the commission decided on a bridge authorization that would allow candidates to bridge their credential, and you can see what requirements are there.
Which materials have been uploaded to the website, and have they been uploaded to the same pilot website?
The field test materials for MMSN and ESN have both been uploaded to the pilot site, but remember they are field test materials. They are password protected. You can send me an email and I can provide that for you. Remember that they are field test materials. They are not the operational materials. Until the commission approves the TPA model, they are still field test materials. And this also holds true for the Ed TPA. I just want to say that because of version control.
What is the likelihood that one or both of the TPAs is not approved in time for the July 1st implementation deadline?
I can only speak to the Ed Specialist Cal TPA, and if it is not approved, James Webb will be out of a job. No, just kidding. No, it is. I've submitted all of the important work. It will, barring something, I always say I don't like to speak for 15 people on the commission, but we have submitted all of the necessary information with regard to the TPEs, the assessment design standards, and the item that I'm presenting in June will be a pretty hefty item that will have the approval, and it is on track to be approved. I can't speak to the Ed TPA, and so that will be something that you'll want to monitor as we are going through the process with the Ed TPA.
Wouldn't the bridge authorization apply for people holding the old credential and not people who may be pursuing the old credential?
The bridge authorization, I believe, addresses your question because it was designed to take someone from the older mild to moderate to the new mild to moderate support needs credential. And so that's where I was saying that if a candidate wanted to complete the new credential, and if your program has the capacity to support them, because what some programs are doing is they are offering both, and they are able to provide the necessary supports so that candidates can, implement the new changes to the mild moderate support needs credential. But again, it depends on if your program has that capacity in order to be able to do so. Smaller programs generally are just cycling them out, and then we'll start the new ones. Larger programs that have more resources are doing both.
That is it for questions in the chat at this time.
Well, I again just want to thank everyone for being here. It only took me an hour this time, so that's pretty good. So you'll get an hour back to your morning. But just remember, please monitor the PSDE news, because there will be technical assistance webinars that I will be offering in the summer, in June, and possibly early in July. Our coordinator meeting, we're anticipating for the Ed Specialist Cal TPA to be sometime at the end of July, beginning of August, to help everyone with information as they are beginning their role as a program coordinator. This will be uploaded to the Cal TPA, Ed Specialist Cal TPA playlist on the YouTube channel. You will also have a link that will give you access to the slides that I presented as well.